بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي هدانا إلى الصراط المستقيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله الطاهرين وأصحابه الكاملين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأن المساجد لله فلا تدعوا مع الله أحدا صدق الله العظيم وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أحب البلاد إلى الله مساجدها وأبغض البلاد إلى الله أسواقها أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Many of you will be aware, just over 2 weeks ago, January 22nd, in India there was a big inauguration. The President, Prime Minister at the time, Narendra Modi, he inaugurated a temple in a place called Ayodhya. Ayodhya is a very iconic place, which we'll go into the details shortly, but this event was a historic event in India. Because as Muslims, for us, we will know this is the place where at one time a masjid stood, Babri Masjid. So on January 22nd, this had been planned for decades, this event. Many influential people were invited, the elite of India, the top-notch, the creme de la creme, multimillionaires, families, the Ambanis, the Mithas, cricketers, the Tendulkars, the Bollywood stars, the Amitabh Bachchans, and many stars, the Khans, were all invited to this event. And if anybody heard the speech of the Prime Minister, it resembles the speech, I don't think many of us will have been alive, 1933, when Adolf Hitler gave. Some of the words he said was, "This day will be remembered 1,000 years from now. This is a new dawn for India." He mentioned he's proclaiming the victory for their god Ram. He mentioned that he was untying a jumbled past. So many of the things he said, and just depending on time we will go into his party, the BJP, many of them call them fascists and very similar to Nazis. And that's why I likened his speech to the speech of Adolf Hitler in 1933. And we all know what Adolf Hitler did to the Jewish people. So this event was broadcast all across India, all across the globe. And if some Muslims, maybe the younger ones, I'm sure the elders will all know the history of this masjid just in the last century. But if we don't take into context the history of this place, the significance, many people will listen to his speech on the BBC News, Al Jazeera, and think it's a very motivational speech. It's inspirational for all Indians, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs. But for those of us who know the context, who know the history, who know how he was dressed, keep up with the news, watch it if you haven't already watched it, how he was dressed, the saffron colors, the Pandits, the Brahmins that were surrounding him. We know the history and the subliminal message, indirect message Modi is trying to give to Indian Muslims. So inshallah in a short time we will go through a brief history of Babri Masjid, the refutation of the Hindutva, what they believe about Muslims and our contribution to India. So starting with the city in which Babri Masjid is, Ayodhya. This is mentioned in Hindu myths. It's a legend. So the Hindus themselves have many myths, and anybody who knows anything about Hinduism, it's not like, we can't even say it's not like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, it's certainly not like these religions, because these religions have a prophet, they have a book, they believe in one God. The Abrahamic faiths, as we call them, one similar thing we have is we all believe in the same God, because we also believe in Isa alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam. It's another point that over the centuries the religions have been changed. Whereas Hinduism is combined by many different theories, ideologies. So one of them in their Vedic scriptures is that their god Ram or Rama was born in this city. So many believe that Manu was also a god found in the city, but this is all mythical and it's a legend. The only people who have promoted this ideology is the party that we know as BJP, and they say this city is actually founded and it's in the Vedic text and it's actually a city, an iconic city for them. So it's historic in the Hindu religion. So we've got to understand now a bit of history from the Hindu version. So what I'm going to explain is what the Hindus believe, what Babri Masjid was, why they demolished it. So try and understand what I'm about to say is not our version, it's the Hindu version. They believe in the 16th century, a barbaric group came, very radical group, uncouth, and it was under the Mughal Emperor Babur's orders. They destroyed a temple, so they believe there was a temple there. This is a point of controversy between us and them, and they built a masjid. So this is why they believe originally that it was a Hindu temple, the birthplace of Ram. The Muslims came, this barbaric group, Turkish fanatics as they call them. They destroyed our temple, which is a Hindu temple, and then they built this masjid. So, this Hindutva group, now for maybe some of the youngsters here will not understand what exactly is Hindutva, so I'll explain. Hindutva group, it basically means a religious, political and ethnic group. It's an ideology, and it's all of these put together. And what they believe, essentially, and maybe the elders can correct me if I say something wrong, you guys will know the history of India better than me. They believe India belongs to the Hindus. Essentially, it was for the Hindus. The Muslims came and kind of destroyed our culture and civilization and our glorious empire. So there were many groups that believed this. Before, it was mainly the RSS, and now the dominant group is the BJP, which promotes this Hindutva ideology. So the demolishing of the temple is what they say is the reclaiming of their original heritage. And it's also a manifestation of the erasure of Muslim influence. Basically, they want to put the Muslims down or completely get rid of them. So this is what the Hindus believe. What I've said so far is what the Hindus believe, mainly the groups like BJP and those who support and promote Hindutva. So what is the real history? What is pure history? Academically, what do people say in books, people who've researched it, historians and archaeologists? We need to look at who built Babri Masjid and why it was built. So in this there is a difference of opinion. Now it was named Babri Masjid, so some people say it was the first Mughal Babur, and it would make sense to name it after him. Others have said it was Aurangzeb, some have said it was Delhi Sultans who came before Babur. So a Muslim built it. The most prominent view is that Babur built it because of his name. For one thing we know for sure is that a masjid stood there. There are pictures. Whether they're in color, they're in black and white, the pictures are there. For 500 years this masjid stood there, and it was built in 1526 according to one report, but it was the 1500s. Now one thing about Babur building it, what the Hindus say, is that Babur was the founder of the Mughal dynasty. And one thing Babur did, which not many Muslim rulers did, he wrote his autobiography whilst he was alive. Babur was educated, he was a literate man, he was a poet. So in this autobiography, it was called Baburnama. In Baburnama, Babur wrote everything. What he ate, what time he slept, his leisure, pleasure, exercise, where he went for hunting. So if he wrote such trivial details, the Hindus mention this Baburnama, Babur's autobiography, doesn't mention Babri Masjid. Okay, so that's a point they have. That if Babur built it and you claim it's yours, how come this great autobiography of Babur's doesn't mention such a great masjid for you, Babri Masjid? So the Hindus use this as evidence. What we say, there are hundreds and thousands of masjids in India. Yeah, India has a large population of Muslims. So it was no big deal. This is one of our answers, that it's possible that he built it and there were many masjids named under him and he built. So it wasn't such a magnificent and important thing. And the other thing we've got to understand, the term Babri Masjid, it wasn't always termed the Babri Masjid. It's only in the last century, last 100 to 150 years, it's been called Babri Masjid. One thing in support of the Muslims is a Christian Jesuit priest. His name was Joseph Tiefenthaler. In 1750, so if we say 1500s, this masjid was there. 200 years later, he traveled to India and he spotted a masjid. And he says it was built, the people he spoke to, some say by Babur, some say by Aurangzeb. He described the architecture, the design, the domes, how we know a masjid is, essentially. And then he says some significance of this place. That if you were to speak in one corner, they didn't have microphones like I'm speaking on. So in them days, he said, if you spoke in one corner, you were able to project the acoustics of the masjid in the other corner, even if you whispered. So we know this is back in the day when they didn't have loudspeakers, this is how people gave adhan as well. It was so people can hear it and the echoes. He further writes that near to this masjid, there is a place, a small place with a raised platform. And this is where the Hindus think their god Rama was born. And he described it, so this is a Christian person, so he can't be biased. Joseph Tiefenthaler, he says there are two separate facilities, which wasn't a big deal. There was a masjid, and nearby there was a temple, which those of you who are brought up in India, born in India, lived in India, or even been to India will know, it's very common in India to have a Hindu temple and a masjid on the same road, even next to each other. So this is what he describes. So back to why do the Hindus claim it was theirs? Now I know time is short, but I'm going to try and inshallah squeeze in the important parts. The first person who ever claimed that this place was, the masjid was built on a temple, is a British civil servant, Montgomery Martin, British. I'll keep repeating this line about the British, how they always have a hand in fighting and dividing. So this British civil servant, he claimed that originally it was a temple, the Muslims knocked it down and it became Babri Masjid. But for 300 years, nobody fought. Nobody fought about this place, because if we take what the Christian priest says, well, there were two separate buildings, two separate places of worship. 1857, when the Sultanic Raj came to an end, after this is where the skirmishes and fights started. So in 1859, after the mutiny, the Brahman Hindus, they started claiming that this was our land. There was a temple here at one point, and the masjid was built because our temple was knocked down. So they attacked the masjid, they even stopped Jumu'ah, they stopped other salah, a few people died, and the British were there. So the British intervened and gave it back to the Muslim. So this was the first clash between Hindu Muslims about Babri Masjid in 1859, but it was not under Rajput, not under the Mughals, not under the Marathas, it was under the British. That's the point you've got to remember. So surprise, surprise, the British have come and the Hindu Muslims have started fighting. If you know a bit about other countries, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, in the recent times I'm talking, you will also know why I am repeating this line. Surprise, surprise, British come and fight started. 300 years, nobody fought. In 1885, this was the first complaint to be filed by the Hindu Brahmins, and they said this land is ours. Again clashes happened, small skirmishes again and again, and this kept on happening, but the British always handed it back to the Muslims. In 1947, what happened in 1947? Everybody should know this one. I was looking to see if any youngsters know. 1957, India became independent. So what the Hindus did, they stormed in the masjid. They used this opportunity. They put their little idols, their little gods, Rams, whatever, and they tried to take over the masjid. Fights happened again, on a larger scale this time, because many millions of Muslims were migrating to what we know today as Pakistan. So they used this opportunity that we have the upper hand. The president or prime minister at that time was Jawaharlal Nehru. he shut the masjid down, he shut the facility, temple, masjid, whatever it is, he said shut it down, and he put barbed wire all around. Now, this next point is very important in terms of history, in terms of media, how media can brainwash you, make you a fanatic. In 1987, so maybe some of the youngsters, I was born after that as well, maybe some of the youngsters will have been born, the most watched TV series was produced. Anybody know what it was? Maybe some of you will have watched it. In 1987, some statistics say it was the most watched in the world. In India it was definitely the most watched series. Some say in the world no television series have been produced with millions and millions of viewers. It was a reenactment of the Mahabharata. 80 series. And what this did, it riled up the Hindus. And it showed that this temple, it showed about Ayodhya, about Babri Masjid, about the original temple. And what it did, it was propaganda. So this is how it helped organizations like the RSS and the BJP. I'll give you an example in recent times. In recent years, many Muslims have been watching a Turkish TV series called Irtugul. Yeah? Some of you are smiling, so maybe you've watched it, maybe more of the youngsters. It shows about Turkish times, the Ottoman times, the Seljuks, and many Muslims, I think it's about 100 episodes as well, 40 minutes or 1 hour, 100 hours, they've been watching this, and it creates a passion for Islam. It creates inside you a dignity, a ghairat, that we as Muslims should stand up for ourselves. So this series of 80 episodes did the same for the Hindus. What was the reaction of this reenactment of the Mahabharata? It instigated thousands of Hindus onto the streets, and what they did, they killed Muslims, attacked them. All this was thanks to the media and the propaganda. And this is what happens when you watch videos, when you read an article, people get josh, passion. Thousands of Muslims were killed. In 1991 they tried, but they failed. In 1992, this was one of the first massacres in India. 3,500 Muslims lost their lives. So all of this was down to this TV series. And this is why many ulama have sat on this minbar. I have heard in this masjid, we say, Muslims, we need our own media. If there is a youngster in college or university, you're looking for a degree, go into media. Use social media. There's still some ulama nowadays still debating whether we should come on TV, whether we should use videos. This is what led to many Hindus getting instigated and thousands of mobs coming onto the streets of India and attacking Muslims. So after this, what happened? The government shut down the facility again. Many complaints were made. In 2010, the government decided to divide the area into 3 parts. 1 part for the Muslims and 2 parts for the Hindus. Why 2 parts for the Hindus is because, as we know, Hindus have many castes and sects between them. So one section was for one Hindu sect, the other section was for another Hindu sect. But nobody was happy. The Muslims weren't happy with their small sections, and the Hindus also have their division between them. So it went finally to the Supreme Court of India. This issue of Ayodhya and Babri Masjid went right to the top level, Supreme Court of India, and they got an archaeologist, and I'm going to quickly finish on this point. The guy was a Muslim, believe it or not. Shocking, yeah? But he wasn't a proper Muslim. He was one of those Marxist, agnostic type of Muslims, sellout type of Muslim in a nice way. So his name was KK Muhammad. You can find his details online. He did his work, he did his archaeology, and he claimed, we know, that this place was a mandir at one time. So then, in 2019, the BJP party, they gave permission to build the biggest temple, millions of pounds. Millions of pounds, I've got the figure here, in dollars is $217 million was spent on this temple, which was inaugurated on 22nd January. That's 170 million pounds to build this temple. They were given permission, and this is how we lost a masjid. I did this talk today because in the last few months we've been talking about Masjid al-Aqsa and Palestine. And this is a masjid, many of you sitting here come from an Indian background. Whether you come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, or even Nepal, Babri Masjid matters to you, because this happened when India was not divided. The skirmishes, the fights happened when India was not divided. So it's very important as Muslims, especially the youngsters, keep on top of the news. I believe in Palestine, keep on top of Palestine, but it shouldn't be your parents, your grandparents are from India and you only talk about Palestine. I disagree with that. I disagree with that. Babri Masjid was also a masjid. It was a house of Allah. It was a place of worship. It's been demolished. And today the chants of Jai Shri Ram, victory to Ram is being said in that place which was a masjid. Tomorrow let it not be that these masjids, the one we're sat in, we have 45 masjids in Blackburn, we have 2,000 masjids in England. They slip out of our hands because nobody bothered to pray in these masjids and fight for them. Babri Masjid was lost, so we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that maybe a time will come when this masjid will be returned to the Muslims. We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all masjids from the Haramain Sharifain in Makkah and Medina and Masjid al-Aqsa and every masjid that is sanctity, the whole sanctity in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protected. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to inhabit these masjids, pray in these masjids and make them use for what they were built for. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallahumma bihamdi.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة.